How could you not get people hungry for tables when you do spots like this? You stack up double tables, puts Matt Hardy across the tables, and then power bombs Jeff Hardy through the double tables.
It was a good one.
It looks so good. I love it. It's a radical edition of Monday Night Raw. Welcome to Tales from the Attitude Era.
Sneaking in those radical branding the way JR did at this episode.
Yeah,
what a radical idea. He kept shoving that radical idea in there.
It's Rob Pasbani here as always, joined by the man who controlled the pencil.
Yeah.
Tommy Blacha, the lead writer, head writer, the person in the writing staff for WWE during this era.
Creative, behind the scenes creative. The pencil and the eraser.
Oh,
just as important. Back in the day when the yellow legal pad ruled all, before they segued into laptops.
Before the era of double space.
Yeah.
This is a pretty legendary episode of Monday Night Raw we're reviewing. It's the January 31st, 2000 episode, live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Igloo.
What a weird arena.
Oh, why is that?
Well, for those not familiar, the Igloo was oddly almost like, you know how the Toronto ballpark has those like weird little segments that open up, so it's kind of can be open air and closed. The Igloo is like that. And it is like an igloo. It's like a dome.
Oh.
And then it has those segments like it was, but I think it maybe opened once and they said, forget it. But also it wasn't like a baseball or football. It was like for hockey or, basketball. It's like, why does it open? Why is it open air? And I think they just maybe never used it as open air.
I had no idea it was open air. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, I think it may be like, they designed it once and like that's a bad idea, or it didn't work, or the maintenance, so it remained closed forever. But it hit the roof. It was an odd place, the Igloo. Yeah, it was cool.
In recent years, Pittsburgh has kind of gotten a bad rap as kind of a quiet town. Like they're not really very loud.
Interesting.
And so I was wondering if that would be the case here. Not so much. When the WWE is hot, the crowds react.
Absolutely not. Yeah, and that's also like Kurt Angle's hometown, and frankly, I think Pittsburgh is such a cool town. It's such a beautiful, different town, driving into a lot of towns, especially when you're on the road there, you kind of like step out of an arena and everywhere's like, where am I? Kansas City? Everywhere is kind of the same, but Pittsburgh and the Three Rivers and the downtown, it's a cool town, and the foothills right outside. I like it a lot.
So the show doesn't start
putting it over.
Putting it over big time. And it's the winter time. It's cold. It's not a warm time of year. Show starts with a match, but the match is immediately interrupted by the 4 WCW wrestlers who will soon be, but not yet known as, the Radicalz. We'll call them that just for keep things short. But it's Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Perry Saturn. We've been talking about their impending arrival. Now, you've mentioned on the show that you just showed up in Connecticut, in Stamford, to the headquarters one day, and you just saw them training at the gym.
They were just kind of hanging around. They weren't even training. They just were in like their street clothes, but I think they were just looking at the facility. But it was, I think, maybe a week before this or 2. It wasn't that long. Just everything was so rapid pace. It was just funny, but I just, kind of was there and like looked and like, oh, they're here. Oh, I guess, yep, they're signed. And then even naming them the Radicalz was so funny. This is how just the pace of everything was so crazy. Someone's like, well, this faction needs a name. And then it was like in a meeting or something, Jared, like one of them mentioned they like the Radicalz. And I think maybe someone said like, well, how about like Radicalz with a Z? Okay, it's Radicalz. And, then moving on. I mean, that's just how shit worked. It was like, okay. It was like
right. And I think they had a faction in WCW that had a similar name. Revolution was the name of their faction.
Nice.
It was Saturn, Benoit, Malenko, and Shane Douglas, who Shane Douglas was also in their crew of people wanting to leave WCW, but then he learned that WWF did not want him. So he was like, I guess I'm staying, I guess. Because also a big thing was in WCW, I'm just reading, in reading the observers of this time, WCW had guaranteed contracts which means you got paid no matter what. If you wrestled or not, you're getting paid this much a week or a year. Right. It's based annually. With WWE, they
worked less too,
and they worked much less, right? Or they didn't even have to work at all, and they'd make the same money if working or not. Yeah. In WWE, they had downside guarantees. So all WWE would guarantee was the minimum amount that you would make a year. And then the way you really make money is by showing up. So every Raw you wrestle, you get paid a certain amount. Every pay-per-view, you get a certain bonus. You get merch bonuses.
Yeah, how that worked, was, let's say you have a downside guarantee. That was, it's like, if you show up and you get hurt your first day out, blow your knee out, your downside guarantee was $250,000. You'd get paid that. And then, but you had the potential to make upwards of whatever, which kind of was like some ways made sense, but also sometimes it sucked because for me, I always thought like, you'd get merch percentage, but it's like, but what if you're a heel? Heels don't sell fucking t-shirts as much as,
right.
And things like that. And so then it started to leak in. I know years later after I left, there was some kind of idea for someone, I can't remember exactly, but like, this is great. Maybe it was like a Daniel Bryan thing or something. Like, I think he was going to be part of like with Bray Wyatt or something like, this is cool creatively. And then someone's like, we got this merch thing planned and this and like, okay. You know what I mean? The ideas would kind of run into brick walls based on potential merch things. And just, the apparatus got so big. So creative couldn't be like, kind of wheeling and dealing like, this is cool. This is hot. Let's do this. Oh, wait a minute. So things got funky.
Yes, I was reading in the Observer that the belief is that Benoit's downside is $400,000 and the rest of them got $250,000 a year. And that is significantly less than what they were making in WCW. And Shane Douglas, I don't believe was even offered that. So he was getting much more in WCW. So he decided to stay. But they did note that all the wrestlers in WWF were making multiples of their downside guarantee just because business was so hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And frankly, sometimes hopping back and forth just builds your personal brand, much more.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine at WCW is like, this, and even with the contracts and stuff, people were like, they're spending too much money and this might, this is going, so. Yeah, it was a hard decision for them. Yeah, and especially sucked because Eddie Guerrero got hurt like almost immediately.
Oh yeah, so we're going to talk about that on the SmackDown show because that's when he got hurt. But it totally derailed all the plans, I'm sure. But let's talk about before that. Like, so you learn that these guys are around. Like, what's the meeting like when McMahon is like, okay, we got them in. How do we write them into the storylines or whatever? I
think easily just like, they're a faction. We shouldn't do them one at a time. They're all together. They just start like showing up, and then like, here's new guys on the block that are gonna like be something to deal with. So you can kind of just meter it out slow. So this was like a perfect thing. Like, okay, let's let's have them show up and like how much will they get involved? Exactly. I don't know. Maybe what I mean.
I thought it was a brilliant idea to align them immediately with Cactus Jack because for example, him versus it wouldn't really make sense if The Rock invited them. Like The Rock doesn't seem like the type that would be friendly and welcoming. That's not really in his character. Whereas with Cactus Jack, you could believe that. Plus, he does, like, for a viewer like myself at the time, Cactus Jack does have some affiliation to WCW. He came from there, so you could believe how he would know how they'd have mutual friends, and how he invited them. So how was that decision made to align them with Cactus Jack?
Well, part of it
make some faces
is fundamentally. Cactus Jack is an incredible mouthpiece. You know what I mean? And none of those guys really were. I mean, I always found, they're more quiet, really.
Yeah, at the time, none of them were mic guys. Eddie Guerrero hadn't found his voice at the time, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, when you say he hadn't found his voice, I don't think he had the opportunity. I think he was always golden for me,
That's true, yeah.
Personally, and then, but it was kind of like, that was just like a natural idea to be like, what a great segue. And then he can, he's never going to be flat on the mic with them. You know what I mean? You kind of run the risk if anyone like just by aligning him, like, oh, this makes sense or whatever. It's like, oh, okay. Like, you talked about even like, you just kind of talk things through like, oh, the Road Dogg's great, New Age Outlaws, but then it'd be kind of a clusterfuck. Why are they there? There's too many of them or whatever. And Cactus Jack is lone. And a big part of it was like, he's never going to be crummy on the mic. You know what I mean? So that's like, he's a good mouthpiece. So that was really a big fundamental part of it, as opposed to like, yes, the WCW alignment or this or that. I think that can be, you can deal with that easily. I mean, but it all stacks up, like you said, like, oh yeah, that works too. And that works too. But that probably, to me, I think was the fundamental point.
And I feel like this was a big shot to WCW. They're the heart of their roster has been pulled away because these 4 guys were the work rate. Like they were the ones putting in the good matches to cover for all the embarrassing main events you would have with the guys who just didn't want to work, who were there just to collect their pay. Like these guys proved like they're here to work. They took a pay cut to show that like we're ready to, have our opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
And the ratings showed it. The ratings were huge. Let me just quickly say that Raw drew a 6.59 rating. 6 in the first hour, 7 in the second hour.
That's like 13 Tonight shows in tonight's era, right?
Yeah. A 10 share. 1 out of 10 people watching cable were watching Monday Night Raw, which is crazy. And compared to Nitro, now look, this was Nitro now is considered they're doing bad. This is a bad rating for Nitro. 2.79. Today would be like, like let's celebrate.
Yeah, incredible.
And a 4 share, which is still a very, very good number. And it's the lowest rated Nitro in years.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So these are massive numbers. The total audience on Monday for wrestling on this Monday was 9.7 million people, which is crazy.
Destroying the fabric of America one Monday at a time.
But I mean, I feel like this was a very, very big event for wrestling fans. Like, this is a big jump because it was quick. Benoit, like all these guys were on WCW not 2 weeks ago.
And there was so much going on at this show too. And it was like, and the madman that Vince McMahon was in, and I can't, and it's such a whirlwind. I'm trying to remember stuff happening at some point. Again, in the previous weeks was like, the XFL. That's all like.
Right, that's launching on Thursday. It's like Lillian Garcia was teasing it during the show that there was a big press conference scheduled for Thursday. I can't even imagine.
Well, what was crazy, I hadn't been there that long, and there was a point like Vince was like, well, let's talk about the XFL in Stanford. And it was like, and I remember saying things like, well, wouldn't it be great if like you paid everyone nothing? And then the winners got $10 million, something like really crazy like that. And he's like, oh, that's cool. Sometimes I would like you to just talk to things and he would take it. And that kind of disseminated into everyone getting a same pay and the winners getting $1 million. They couldn't quite do it that crazily, which I thought would have been insane. Like no one gets paid anything, but the winners get so much. But I remember the guy from Creative Services, and it was funny because a lot of times there'd be people I wouldn't even know because I just immediately was on the road, and there was some guy like, hey, what do you think of these? And Vince would be to like Ian Gewurz or whatever. What do you think of these team names and all these logos? And like, oh, it's cool. But I said like, I don't like that it's all from the same design lab. And I don't like a lot of these names like the Chaos. And it's like, I said, the classic names, Vince, are all like the Giants, the Raiders, the somethings. You should have one that's the Demons. And he went to the guy, goes, yeah, name one the Demons. So I always like, I always have a point of pride where like, oh, and then it's suddenly like in 3 weeks, like there's uniforms and there's the Demons. And like, I'm kind of like, oh, I named them, but no one really cares or would listen. But like, it's just like, it's the XFL. It's here. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, well, incredible. I can't imagine what hell it must have been for Creative Services when Vince showed up and was like, hey, you need to create 8 different types of branding, all these different iterations and the XFL branding, and it has to be done in 2 weeks or whatever, And I think Creative Services at this time was on another level for WWE.
Well, and also, but what was good was everything was so nuts that they kind of got left alone. There was no, often things are shittier when it's like there's more time and more money. And then there's more nitpicking. That's why commercials are the worst to work on. And because it's like, I don't know, the Nestle Quick Rabbit, should his ear be canted left? Should it be this? You know what I mean? Where this was like, we got to go. It's got to get ready. Okay. You know what I mean? It's a little, I think a lot of people, even in the incredible production value of WWF at the time, WWE, that really you look at it, that's what made it a lot better than a lot of other places, because they spent so much money. They had all these graphics people and all the people back in Stanford in the studio. He spent so much money on that. He's kind of like, money is no object. And a lot of them got like left alone in terms, because just the pace was so crazy. So sometimes we'd look at the visual motif of a new pay-per-view, No Way Out or something, and you'd see the visual package. It wasn't like nitpicking, like Vince wasn't in there like, oh, I don't like that color or this and that. It was like, looks good, because the pace was so fast. So I think actually kind of the opposite. A lot of people like, there's a big workload, but we really get left alone, and we got the best. We got a bunch of people. Everyone's getting paid well. We got the best equipment, you know, so that's what really put WWF apart from. And to this day, the same thing was like, they spared no expense. They didn't cut corners. And so I think a lot of people liked working there for that, because they'd be like, yeah, go for it, you know.
And one more question before we get into the segment by segment. There was a note in the Observer that there was talk that there was question on how to present the Radicalz. And one of the pitches was that Vince would bring in the Radicalz to be a thorn in the side of Triple H and Stephanie. Do you remember this pitch, and how far did it go?
Well, like I said, I remember you think of like a bunch of things, like you kind of talk through. I do remember that, but I don't think it was like that serious. But you know what happens is in the production meetings, like agents, whoever, people bring, oh, here's ideas. And also at the same time, everyone who's on the roster was like, yes, I'd like to be aligned. So there's talk about it. Absolutely everyone, you know, like Taz, I'd like to bring in the Radicalz. So of course, you know, it's you and you and you. So you kind of talk a lot of things out. So, but again, I think the pace was so fast, like, you know, that might be good. And then Vince's like, well, it's not time yet. So it just gets squashed. So it wasn't like too serious. Again, the pace of everything made it like, well, you know, we'll see. But yeah, there was talk of Shane, talk of Steph. You know what I mean? You kind of go through everything. Oh, what if? No. Okay, no.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go through it. This is a really, really fun episode, and really like an important episode. Like we were talking last week about how the episode of Raw felt almost like a throwaway because everyone was so hungover from the Rumble. This had like the complete opposite feeling. This was like every segment mattered and had a point.
Yeah. It was so chaotic, and it was like so much stuff, and it was one of those episodes like, wow, when I really looked at it and laid it out, like, man, there's everything. And here's a little announcement about the XFL. And remember Steve Austin here, he's going to be back. And then, oh, now this, and it's the Radicalz. It's like, holy shit, you know?
Yeah. So we kick it off with the Outlaws doing their intro. Outlaws, of course, super over. They're taking on the team that will soon be known as Head Cheese. Backstage, Steve Blackman says, we have to concentrate on the gold tonight. No Head Cheese. Let's be serious, you know. And then Al Snow goes, all right, how about we call our team name Snowstorm? And Blackman's like, okay, sure. And so Al Snow puts a raincoat and an umbrella on him, and he's like, come on, knock it off. We got to be serious.
Yeah.
And he throws in one more little joke. He's like, all right, what about snowballs? And he picks up a jock strap. He's like, come on.
I love just like, it's such a like Steve Blackman as the straight man, but you know, just the sense of like an old movie thing. He allows him to put the stuff on him, you know, instead of in reality be like, don't fucking put that on me.
Yeah.
You know, he just like has that slow burn of like, Steve, you know what I mean? It's working for me. Yeah.
As Al Snow is making his entrance, we see in the front row, Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko entering the building. Benoit and Saturn have beautiful velour tops on, like these very fancy tops. Al Snow gives them handshakes like he knows them. And Ross mentioned how they thumbed their noses at their last employers.
Yes.
And all night, Ross was making little lines like, this is a pretty radical strategy on their part. Like throwing the word radical in there.
Actually, the Revolution would have worked better here.
But I'm guessing, I'm guessing that was already trademarked. So
yeah, and
it was so cool. Like as a fan, just to see this and to see, I was such a big Chris Benoit fan at this time. I always felt that he was not utilized to the best of his abilities in WCW because he was always so much better than everyone else. Just couldn't really talk, but the matches were great. And so it was really, really exciting to see him in WWF and the other guys too.
And it was one of those things to me, you know, they get the moniker like, oh, he can't really talk. But he was like so old school. But, you know, you could argue a lot of guys, like it didn't matter about like, he talked like if you saw him in a bar and he was pissed, it's not like you don't have to deliver promos. That's sometimes like I think wrestlers fuck up like, oh, I've got to deliver this kind of Dusty Rhodes-esque promo. Like, well, no, not everyone can do that, and everyone should try to do that. So he was always very genuine, and he didn't man a few words, but he never really did promos, in my opinion, that were like, oh, he's saying more shit than he should. He just came across like, even if he was like fumble mouthed or whatever, it's like, oh, he comes across as like a pissed off badass that doesn't want to fucking talk. And I always like that. And I think sometimes like wrestlers, like you can be a wrestler that doesn't want to give a promo, like an athlete that's like, okay, I got to answer these questions. Leave me the fuck alone. I just want to get in the ring and kick someone's ass. So he was very good like that. You know what I mean? He never stunk on a promo.
No,
he just wasn't like, you know, which is a good lesson. I think a lot of guys fucking shit the bed when they're like, now's my mic time and I'm going to fucking talk and talk. Like, no, you shouldn't be. You should say a lot less, you know? So,
yeah, not everyone could be The Rock.
Yeah, yeah.
And interestingly, too, in The Observer, there were some swipes from guys in WCW that said that they would never get over because they're too short. There was a thing about their height and how like the default height in WWE is like 5 inches taller than WCW because everyone's so much bigger. But I don't think it ended up being a problem for them.
No, yeah, absolutely not. Yeah. And also like that stuff's always fun to just like, you know, shine a lantern on it. So like, oh, okay, there's a short thing, like start making short jokes, but they're more than competent. So that just becomes another part of the storyline.
So it's a fun match. There's some cool little innovative moves. And eventually Road Dogg and Al Snow are wrestling on the outside. Road Dogg gets chucked into the area of the ringside where the Radicalz are, and he gets clotheslined over the barricade into the laps of the Radicalz. Road Dogg stands up and just shoves him. He makes the first contact with the Radicalz, which I think is very important because that just shows that they're just defending themselves. They're here for a good time. They're not here to start any shit, but they were instigated against, so they're going to go for it. And they immediately attack. And it was so cool. It looked great. The crowd was super into it. They run into the ring. Saturn gives Billy Gunn a pump handle slam, and then Eddie Guerrero runs on the top rope, does a frog splash, immediate Eddie chance. Malenko does a suplex, and then Benoit gets on the top rope. Huge pop for his top rope headbutt, which every time I see now makes me cringe because it looks so cool, but you know what ended up happening because of it.
Yeah. Arguably, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Jim Ross is yelling, "This is shocking."
And if I remember correctly, part of it was like you said, like, well, who's going to bring the Radicalz in, blah, 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 blah. But it's kind of like, okay, let's dole it out slow. You know what I mean? We don't need to. It's enough to have them there. And I think this came out of like more agent things, kind of like, oh, maybe they should, have a little interaction. Then it just turned into like, why not have it explode like this? But like you said, it was very important to be like, they're not coming in and making a statement. It just got out of control immediately through a shove. So that was something that, for lack of a better term, came organically out of all the people involved. That didn't come from creative. We're going to do this, and then they're going to exhibit their this or that. It just was one of those cool things. Like I always try to point out, like, the machine is always working, and all kinds of things happen. So even as creative, you're like, oh shit, I didn't know. Whoa, this is happening. You know what I mean? And then you just react and go. So that, I think that just happened, like guys getting together and like, oh, why not? And it worked great. And it was like, oh, immediate physicality. They're here, but at the same time, it's not like, we still don't know exactly who they're aligned with. We still have that mystery. We're still doling it out slow, but we had incredible physicality. So it was great.
And then they're walking up the ramp, and I like to, are they going back in our locker room? What are they doing? Very great calls by JR here. After the break, Cactus Jack greets the Radicalz backstage and thanks them for accepting the invitation. Little Barb at WCW says, how does it feel to see actual people out in the audience? And then they thank him, and that's the beginning of these ongoing backstage segments. We learned that tonight Kurt Angle will face The Rock. It's returned to Pittsburgh. Of course, this is the first show in Pittsburgh since the Survivor Series, which is when Kurt Angle made his debut. And it's crazy that we've completed the 3-month touring cycle that WWE is on, and now they're back on, the Northeast shots that they do every 3 months or so.
Yeah, and even that cycle with the mix of simultaneous house shows, I don't know exactly how it went, but you tried to stay in the Northeast a lot more. And then especially the ticket sales didn't matter. The more we can stay in the Northeast because everything's sold out. You know what I mean? Generally speaking, the more farther out they go, it's we need to go farther out because they haven't seen it in a while, and ticket sales. So, but just for production ease and the TV developing into this huge thing, the more you stay in the Northeast, the better.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Finally, your Olympic hero has come back to Pittsburgh, Kurt Angle says. Big Booze. Yeah. He says he's your new local hero. It's no longer Mario Lemieux. If he had a little more courage, maybe he'd still be playing hockey today and save the Penguins. Now, he had did he have cancer, right? Was that it?
Right. That was one of my favorite things. That was my idea. That was kind of because Mario Lemieux, people, just a mythical sports figure.
Yes.
At his peak, he was like Wayne Gretzky with muscle. He was unstoppable. He was one of the top 3 hockey players of all time. Unbelievable. Has I think he had Hodgkin's disease, had to retire, and people were just in Pittsburgh, just the number one beloved. Then he ended up owning the Penguins, and then actually he played while he was an owner. He's so good. I think they gave him a deferment. Let's not wait 5 years to put him in the Hall of Fame. Let's put him in. He's just crazy. So the notion that Kurt, and I remember talking to Kurt, and Kurt Angle is so good because he did grow up 6 blocks from the arena, and I said hey, let's do this thing where you claim Mario Lemieux doesn't have enough courage to be the hero when he beat cancer, and then I go, and I remember Kurt Angle looking at me goes oh, they're gonna hate me, but he just embraced it. It's his hometown, and it's he's Kurt Angle's he's a natural, just not only delivering stuff comedically, physically, because he was a gold medal wrestler doesn't mean you can't just adapt to the physicality of working punches and selling and all this stuff. That has nothing to do with being an athlete. I mean, he's got the panache. He's just all across the board. It's he's great. He's embracing the heel and this new weird incredible role that's a confused heel that panders to the crowd and can't understand why he can't get cheers, and it just grows and he gets boos. Just great. It's just and it's so unique.
And I feel this is the first time WWE has done a character like this where he thinks he's a face, but the crowd treats him like a heel. I can't think of anyone before Kurt Angle.
No, this was the first one, and it was so needed because it was kind of the age of this is a conundrum because it's kind of the anti-hero, Austin and whatever. It's they're acting like heels, but they're baby faces and they're over. So who's a heel? You know what I mean? To people, just, it's starting to be the lines are blurred. So this guy, it's he acts like an 80s baby face, but they boo him and he can't it's just it's just so unique. And it's it's great. And anytime you can get people enjoying booing someone, it's fantastic. And it's very unique. And then the more he made that confused look you people don't get it. I'm here for you. Boo, fuck you. It's what? That just, you get that feedback loop it's growing. It's great. And perfect example. This was a big coming out party, if you will, or whatever, just something. And the Rock, and so exciting. So good.
And he goes, don't worry, where Mario left off, I will gladly take over. And I start tonight.
Yeah.
We get a rundown of the matches tonight. We have Triple H versus Kane in the main event. We have Jericho versus X-Pac. And a Lumberjill Snow Bunny match.
Yes.
I thought we were done with these mud wrestling themed kind of matches.
What?
We have one more left.
Who said that? Who said that?
How did this Snow Bunny match come about? Like, this feels like there's a lot of production here. You got to have the snow generated and cool.
Again, the machine, what was so great was like production meeting. Yeah, we can have snow in this. Hold on. We need this. Later, fuck. It arrives, you know. And it's funny because I saw an interview with one of the Crockett's talking about WCW just leaking money like a sieve, but trying to compete with WWF at the time in terms of like, we had to buy a bus to blow up and turn over because that started to be, you know, like the things were getting so huge. But the WWF and then Vince were like spending money, but making money. And WCW started to be like, we got to spend this money and do these gimmicks to compete, but they didn't have the proper machine. And they just like, they started to hemorrhage money. And that's really what helped tank them. You know, it wasn't just numbers and, you know, and contracts. And it was things like this, but the WWF was just a machine. You just like, we'd have these morning meetings before the production meeting. And I'd just get on the phone, you know, hey, we need this. And it would show up. It was kind of, yeah.
That's magic.
It's like a genie in a bottle.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So we see the first of 2 Super Bowl ads that ran. I guess the Super Bowl was the night before. The first one was a group of babies in a baby ward, and they all are dressed like various pro wrestling superstars, causing chaos for the nurses. Mm-hmm. The last one is one dressed as The Rock and does the people's eyebrow. Very cute. Do you remember these commercials? Did you guys have any input on these, or did you guys just hire a third party?
Zero. It was some other part of the company. In fact, I think I heard something that these commercials were, and also we got to remember wrestling was looked at like shittily. So there's behind the scenes politics, but I think these commercials were rejected.
One of them was rejected, actually.
Yeah,
they said during the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, so it was this. There was this. One of them was a beauty contest where one of the losers gets very upset and hits the winner with a chair, and there's like a whole cat fight. And then the last one, which got rejected, was a nursing home, and a bell rings, and then they all turn into wrestlers. Like one of them is like, "Hello, ladies," and all that. It's actually quite mild for rejected.
Yeah, and you know what? They also they didn't have great production value, really.
They were very cheesy.
Yeah, they were.
I don't know. Honestly, the whole exercise felt like a giant waste of money because you had to pay millions of dollars to these creative agencies to storyboard, you know, like, I have these plans and meetings and approvals and all this shit. And like, who's going to watch the Super Bowl, see this ad and be like, oh yeah, I need to watch WWF now.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're never making that money back.
Well, frankly, I think these may have been done some kind of version of like half-ass internally and something. I don't think they were like classic, like Madison Avenue. Mm-hmm. A little later, they got some of that. They put some of that big money and had a couple like high production value commercials. These, I don't know how they came about, frankly, but I was kind of like, ooh, these aren't great. You know what I mean?
I know, even if the commercials cost $0 to make, you're paying millions for the ad time, you know, like even just that alone.
Certainly. Yeah. But you know, hey, it's Vince McMahon.
Right.
New football league. Oh, I lost 40 million. Like, my lifestyle hasn't changed. You know, it's just numbers and, you know, no problem. But, you know, he's a risk taker and, you know, and many times over it paid off huge. But yeah, I agree. These were a waste of money.
So backstage, the Outlaws storm into Triple H's locker room. And by the way, the Igloo has what I consider the ugliest wallpaper I've ever seen. Yeah. All like these segments and the APA segments, I was constantly distracted by this weird beige wallpaper with like green elements on them. I don't know.
Yeah. The Igloo's a weird place. I don't know what the capacity was, but it was really cool. I mean, it was packed and it was exciting. But like I said, it's a weird. I wish they had more shots. The dome is weird. It's not like a typical arena. It was a very odd place. I found it stuck out in my mind because a lot of other places in new are not like, oh, whatever, Kemper Arena, how does that look or whatever. But the Igloo's like, oh yeah, the Igloo. That was a weird place.
So the Outlaws complained. They're like, hey, what's going on? Like what are these guys doing here? The Radicalz. And Triple H was like, well, why did you attack them? It sounds like you kind of, the Outlaws are like, we have a problem. And then Triple H is like, it sounds like you have a problem, not us.
Right.
Like you guys have to take care of that, which I thought was interesting. And then Big Show barges in. He has a new look, which is immediately like, whoa, what happened to Big Show? Looks totally different. Triple H calls him Gomez from the Addams Family, which I think is quite astute.
Yep.
I think it's a good look for Big Show for his like new heel persona. He kind of needed an update, and his hair was thinning as well, so I could see how he wanted to change it. I think he looks good for his role right now. He said Triple H said he wanted a witness. He found his witness. It's the WWF head of security, Jim Dotson. We've talked about him on the show before. Dotson, a very imposing figure, never quite made it into the ring. But he confirmed that he was standing right there. You could see him on the screen looking at the two of them. Dotson confirmed that it looked like Rock's feet touched first. Both feet touched before the Big Show's. Triple H said that's not enough and he's going to need video proof by Thursday. Big Show says he'll give him exactly what he wants, but he's pissed now. And he's threatening him that, like, this better end. And then now the Billy Gunn and Road Dogg are mocking Triple H for having a problem, which I thought was a cute little button for this segment.
Cute little button.
Cute little button.
That's not the terminology we use here.
Little tag at the end. We have Christian versus Devon. This is playing off the feud that escalated last week with the Dudleys and Edge and Christian. Edge and Christian ran in on the Dudleys' attack on the Hardys. So it's a quick match. Bubba tries to interfere, gets stopped by the ref. So the ref is distracted. Edge runs in, gives Devon a super kick. Then Christian gets his unprettier for the victory. Bubba immediately runs in, attacks both guys. They grab a table, put Edge on the table, try to put them through the table, but the Hardys save the day. And the Hardys end up DDTing Devon through a table, setting up another table, and then Bubba gets swantoned through the table. So it was a 4-on-2 attack on the Dudleys.
More ridiculous table action.
You're really feeding the hunger. This is how the WWE audience built their addiction to tables. Here.
Yeah. And if for people that, and there's certainly a lot of them who are anti-table smart marks, you got to remember, it still was a little fresh here.
This is very fresh. This is the first time tables are actively being used on WWE TV as it's the first time a table is somebody's weapon of choice.
Right.
There have been table spots prior, but
you have to remember anytime a crowd chants for something we're going to use it till they stop chanting for it. That's, and tables are getting over with the crowd. More tables. That's wrestling. Feed the furnace.
Do you remember the first table spot in WWF? No. Do you know what that is?
No. Do you?
Yes, I do know. Oh. It was Bret Hart versus Diesel. I believe it was a Survivor Series, and Bret Hart was standing on the apron, and Diesel checked him or whatever, and he fell off the apron into the Spanish announce table, and the announce table folded onto him.
Wow. Was that the beginning of the incredible motif of through the Spanish announce table?
I think so. Yeah. I think that's how it started. Yeah. It was, I think it was Survivor Series 95, I believe.
Wow.
The year.
Yeah. I always enjoyed that. That was always funny that the Spanish,
Yeah. And Hugo Savinovich overselling, falling over.
Yeah. I like those better. I'm a bit of an anti-table smart mark myself.
I agree.
Admit. But the spot you just talked about, that's organic because it's outside the the ring. It's right there. So those are more. I'm an organic table spot smart mark.
Yeah, I hate the setting up, getting the legs, make sure they're okay, and then gently placing the person so the table doesn't break.
Well, also we talked about this before. So like, oh, like the bracket's kind of stuck, and then someone's like, I'm selling over here. Like, oh, I got to go over and knock you out with a couple more shots. So you're continually dazed, so I can get this bracket on this table set. Okay, I got the one table. Oh, and I'm like, I'm still selling over here. Oh shit, hold on, 2 more punches to the face. You're good for another 30 seconds. Let me get this other table. Yeah, that's when it gets to be, clunky.
Yeah. Backstage, the Radicalz and Jack are talking, and who shows up with the Mean Street Posse? And they're big time, and I love this segment. They're like, hey, we want to introduce ourselves. You should know who we are. We're the Mean Street Posse. I'm sure you've heard about how tough we are. You better watch yourselves. And then Cactus Jack kind of gives them the okay, like, hey, guys, why don't you introduce yourselves to the Posse? And then they beat the shit out of them. I love it.
Yeah.
So also because you know that this kind of confrontation actually happens backstage. Like a guy will show up like, hey, I'm this big guy here. You're coming in now. Like, be careful. And so this is great.
And it's also like anything where you like recognize it's a tried and true formula or gimmick. Like Mean Street Posse, like people love to see you get fucking beat up. It's almost like they're not just like talent enhancement. It's more fun of like, which I always enjoyed and work with. That was like, fortunately or unfortunately for them, like people love to see you get destroyed. It's like, it's a good paycheck, but like it sucks. But at the same time, like anything that's over, and especially at this time, like look at the ratings. You're out there. Whatever the future is and how you can segue a career into that or out of that, we'll see. But for that moment, it's like, yeah, that's the gimmick.
Absolutely. I know. And it works for them. I mean, people still think about them. We have Too Cool against The Big Show. This is coming out of the main event of SmackDown. We learned that Rikishi is not here tonight. He sprained his ankle, so he can't help Too Cool. I really enjoyed the psychology of this match, how the two members of Too Cool were double teaming Big Show as much as they could to try to knock him down. And it was a very smart way to give them a moment to get their shit in without making the Big Show look weak. They do manage to eventually get him off his feet and squeeze in a worm. Get a nice pop from the crowd. And then after the worm, that's it. Big Show is all business. He's done playing around, knocks over Scotty 2 Hotty, gives him a choke slam, gives Grandmaster Sexay a power bomb, which you don't usually see the Big Show do. And after seeing it here, I could see why. Because he kind of does it weird.
This was such a good show for just like all the performers and agents, because it could have been potentially a clusterfuck. And it was a weird show. I think sometimes you talk about like themes through a show that you might see or not see. This show had like, there was the handicap match. It was like tag team singles, you know what I mean? It was there was a lot of like mixing match, which kind of helps sometimes, I think, instead of just like, that weird match sticks out like a sore thumb. It's a handicap. But you're also kind of mixing Gaga with real heat. You know what I mean? So potentially this show could have gone off the rails in a bad way. But again, the crowd was so hot. Everyone's on their game, and even like mixing the Radicalz with like, we got Al Snow. That's comedy, but that's not, and all these things, but just like everyone's just so up on it, and even like, the Radicalz are here, kind of like in reality amped everyone up to be like, do a good job, this is good, and WCW's going down, and they feed off that, like we're winning the Monday Night Wars and all this stuff, like just adds to, like I said, booking this whole show the exact same way could have been a complete fucking disaster if it weren't for just agents were on it, coming up with shit. Everyone's fucking great. So
everyone's on their shit. That's the difference. Yeah. Like if this was booked in WCW, it would have gone off the rails because nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah. Or it's too complicated. And what are we doing? And exactly.
Yeah. After this match, we go backstage and The Rock is cutting a promo. Crowd goes absolutely crazy. Big Show's still in the ring, and The Rock is cutting a promo from the Titantron. Finally, The Rock has come back to Pittsburgh. He looks and goes, somebody got a haircut. And everyone laughs. He says, you're no longer a long-haired 7 feet piece of monkey crap. Now you're a short-haired 7 feet piece of monkey crap. Go back to Supercuts and get your $5 back, you jabroni. So good.
It's so good. My favorite, which I always like, would try to bring up in production meetings a lot was like, man, I love that shot where the huge face is on the Titantron and they got the back shot and you got the wrestler like interacting with a like 700-foot rock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just that utilization always like thrilled me. And I would always like, can't we do that? You know, because sometimes you'd go through the show and like a lot of times it gets flat. I often don't like, unless it's hot, you know, there's diminishing returns to two guys in the ring with a microphone like, okay, blah, 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 your turn. Okay, blah, 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 your turn. You know what I mean? There's just the dynamics of it where and that shot of him like pissed off and a huge rock face, you know, that's so massive. And I found it thrilling and to mix that up. So another thumbs up to WWF Now E production value.
I did. I used to love that. I love the set too. The giant Titantron. I really miss it. Now I feel like the Titantron is on the floor. It's very weird. I like it overhead. I like it up.
Yeah, me too. I was like that all the time. And then even when they be like, let's make the screen smaller and put like all this stuff. I was like, no, I still like the bigger screen. You can, you know, do whatever accoutrements, but that was always my favorite. And I'm like, just don't fuck with that. That's wonderful.
So we have The Rock versus Kurt Angle. Angle attacks The Rock before the match even starts. So he gets the upper hand. They end up outside. Crowd is booing Angle. Angle can't take it. He grabs the mic. He says, "What's wrong with you people? I was born in this town, 5 blocks down at Mercy Hospital." Rock quickly mounts a comeback, grabs the mic and says, "It doesn't matter where you were born." Did not expect that at all. So good. So good. Like, this is next level.
And again, to just point out, like, Kurt Angle hasn't been in the ring that long. I mean, the professional wrestling ring, and the timing of everything in this match, his timing's like great. And, you know, when this would have worked and could have been a lot slower. Like, let me grab the microphone and then I get hit from behind. But the pace was so exciting. It was just simple, but like the crowd was so into it. The frenetic way he grabbed the microphone and then The Rock got up immediately and hit him. It just was like, wow, that worked. That would have worked. But to judge it was like 10 out of 10. Perfect. Like the pace, you know, just so impressed with his, like, you know, timing. And that's something you can't underestimate, like, because even like good athletes, football players that get into wrestling sometimes like, oh, it's a little clunky. The timing's a little off. Like, not with Angle. He's just like, oh, I'll just hop right in as a professional wrestler with that kind of timing and that kind of selling and everything and the promos. It's just like, wow, it's so impressive.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like, he's only been in wrestling now, like, what, 4 months? And he fits right in.
I'm not sure how long he developed before that. I know he had Dark Man, but like, just like, how do I sell? You know, like, you know, because often those guys have to be like, oh, I don't know how to sell, or I'm a badass Olympic wrestler. I don't, know how to throw a working punch and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't just, translate. But for him, he's great.
So Angle was about to walk out of the match. He wanted to quit the match. And who would show up behind him but Taz to throw him back in the ring? Kurt Angle turns around and is like, "Who are you? How dare you?" Of course, walks into a spine buster, people's elbow, rock bottom, 1, 2, 3. Kurt Angle can no longer claim he has yet to be pinned in WWE. This is a clean pin. And afterwards, Taz went to clothesline Kurt Angle. Kurt ducked, and Taz clotheslines The Rock. Taz ended up chasing Angle out of the arena. This is the last we see of them for the rest of the night. Interesting little wrinkle here with now The Rock being upset with Taz. Then we have a backstage segment again with this brutal wallpaper. The Posse runs into the Acolytes, and the Acolytes are about to beat up the Posse when the Posse's like, wait, no. we need your protection. We have money. And they're like, oh. Bradshaw says, wait a minute, I have a great idea. We should form a protection agency. We're the Acolyte Protection Agency. Sure, sit down.
Yep, this is great and thrilling. What a show. This is really the coming out party of Kurt Angle in a big way, and the birth of the APA.
Yeah, like, so this is you're a baby, right? Like you're the one kind of putting over Acolytes here, it seems.
I was always putting him over. I was like, yeah, those guys are great. It's so, what I always say, like, it's funny because it's like a black guy and a white guy, but you don't talk about that. And the weird dynamic I always liked too with them was like the like if they never got mad at each other, if like they got mad at whoever else was happening, and I always, like I said, was looking like if you're not chasing a title, you have to be involved in some kind of feud or in Gaga. But this was a way for them to be just this force of nature, this element where they like. I said, like, it's great for someone who just want to, fuck up other people's matches just based on them getting like money. So it's like, and then that just kind of like morphed with everyone talking into like, yeah, they should be backstage, and anyone who can like give them more money or whatever, they'll help it. So they're kind of like they're just a force of nature, neither heel nor babyface. They're always over, and they're not in the title mix. You know what I mean? Anyway, you can get someone as a force of nature that's not it's not either going up or going down, so to speak. And that fit it perfectly.
Yeah, no, this is going to lead to many, many fun segments. And of course, eventually their door and everything, all the little additions to the bit.
Yeah. And they're happy because for pretty much, you're like, we just get to fucking beat people's ass all week. We don't really, it's like, the bumps we take have just gone way down.
Right.
And, yeah.
Backstage, the Radicalz are in the babyface locker room saying hi to everyone. Very fun moment where Eddie and D'Lo meet, and they both say nice move, since both of their finishers is a frog splash. So I thought that was very clever. Saturn asks the Godfathers where all the girls are. And so they're fitting right in the men's locker room. With the baby faces. A quick plug for a Newsweek article cover story. This is another cover story for WWE. China and The Rock on the cover. The headline reads, Inside Wrestling Inc. There was a mention in The Observer of what the article talked about, and it's pretty much the typical fare for the time. Like, should your kids be watching wrestling? All this stuff about, then there's stuff about Jim Ross was talking about like the NWA and how they tried to kill Vince and all this. So nothing really earth-shattering in the article, but still, it feels like every week there's a new publication spotlighting WWF right now.
Yeah, and I actually remember, like I said, things were so crazy. I was interviewed for that, but nothing ever made it in, and I gave some quote where I think I said something like, was talking about Vince. I'm like, well, how big is this getting? And I'm like, I don't think it really matters. I said, if 85% of America watched wrestling on Monday, Vince would be like, how can we get that extra 15%? And I said, and if there was like a nuclear war and like there was no one left, he'd be like, let's put on a show and for these 15, nuclear mutants. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just like that drive. I think it said some things about him, like, it's not about getting, to any point. It's just like, he's like a shark. He's going to keep going, but none of that made it in, and just more trite shit article. I'm concerned.
We have Jericho versus X-Pac. Jericho gets some mic time. Again, this is very crucial, I feel, right now to get Jericho over. You're turning him into this kind of like anti-authority babyface.
Yeah.
He says that X-Pac is thrilled he could hook up with Tori because that means he was finally able to kiss a girl. Got a good pop. He's happy X-Pac was able to find someone more stupid than he is. You can con her into giving you a massage after Jericho gives X-Pac a beating you will never, ever forget. Crowd is singing along with Jericho, so it's working.
Yep.
Also, I never noticed this before, but Jericho's tights are sporting the iconic Eddie Van Halen design, except instead of stripes, it's barbed wire. Very clever. Very clever.
I never noticed that either.
Yeah, I just noticed it this time. So during this match, Chyna comes down with Jericho, and Lawler insinuates that the two of them might be dating, but Ross says it's a relationship based on mutual respect. This is when I noticed that now you've decoupled Chyna and Miss Cat now. Like they're kind of on their own now, and now you're trying to reposition Chyna now with Jericho for the time being, it seems.
Yeah, and part of like behind the scenes, and I was on Jericho's podcast talking to him about this a little bit. I think there's guys like Jack Lanza, was very well-respected agent, and when Jericho working with Chyna, someone might not, what was a difficult situation in a way in terms of just like she's so over, she's so unique. But as far as like working with her, in the ring, kind of tough. And I remember Jack Lanza telling Vince, like, he's making her look like $1 million, Vince. And that carried a lot of weight into Jericho getting like this push. And even this, and then you might look in retrospect, 20 years later, but you got to remember China was so over to not maybe wrestling fans, but just outside of it as this huge anomaly. And then like, oh, she's on the Playboy cover and this, and then on the cover of Newsweek. So it was a great rub for Jericho. You might look at this like, why are they saddling her with? Wasn't the case. It was all rewards for Jericho at this point, getting him over and putting her there and actually like, and having him work more and not being like, oh, they're not, working these matches. And I'm not trying to like shit on her because it's unfair for her to be like, put in this elevated in-ring position that she may be, with all these incredible workers that she may not have been exactly ready for. But sometimes it's like that. Oh, you're so over. We got to do that and simultaneously protect you or do whatever. So just to lay that out there, this was all like a reward for Jericho being good and getting that respect. But like, just somehow that's how it works. Sometimes you're like, why is Vince suddenly in Jericho's corner? It's like, well, Jack Lanza said, making her look like $1 million, Vince, and boom, that was huge. That was huge.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that came out before. So I have a problem with this finish. The clean finish tomorrow mark and me has been pretty chill. I didn't really mind the Dudleys non-clean finish, but this one was egregious. X-Pac sets up for a Bronco Buster. Chyna's in the corner and trips him. X-Pac gets in her face. The referee is looking right at them, and Chyna punches him in the face. There's no DQ call. This is a mistake. I don't think the referee was supposed to see this. Now the referee is arguing with Chyna like, hey, what are you doing? Stay over there, blah, blah, blah. And then Jericho sets up for the walls of Jericho, and they're out of position. So Jericho has to drag X-Pac to the opposite end so that Tori can get on the apron and hit Jericho with the IC title. X-Pac hits a Bronco Buster and gets the pin. It's a non-title match, but now I guess X-Pac has earned himself a title shot. Yeah. This was very messy.
I think that's the bottom line. I don't know. It's so much about the decision, but just it's just messy. The belt shot wasn't great. And sometimes it's just like, poor.
They were just out of position too, it seems.
It was messy. But that's what I miss about kayfabe when, you as a clean finish smart mark go to the ref should, in kayfabe terms, it would have been like, what the fuck's wrong with that ref?
Yeah, why did they call the DQ? I mean, like even forget about exactly. Like that.
But instead of critiquing the overall thing, like how was that booked and how did they come to that? The old kayfabe would be like, you'd always be like, I know that ref should be. He was terrible. What's wrong with him?
What is wrong with him? Yeah. Backstage, Bradshaw reveals the APA logo. He's like, see, protection, Accolades Protection Agency. The Dudleys walk in. The Mean Street Posse are immediately cowering, like, no, don't hurt us. And the APA is like, hey, we're protecting them now. And Dudley say, actually, they need protection too. They don't have cash, but they could write a check. The APA are like, all right, fine. we'll make it work. Then we have the Lumberjill Snow Bunny match. All the Lumberjills come out. Ivory seems very excited to be here, which seems against the character that she had a week or two ago. I'll let it pass. Moolah and Mae Young also out there as part of the Lumberjills. This is the only mention of Mae this episode and that she's pregnant. The big announcement from the day, which I think just shows like how much was going on in this episode that you barely were able to even include this. Yeah. There was just too much.
And believe me, there's times with like, oh, right, she's pregnant. Oh, shoot. Well, we've got this. Fine. And then sometimes, and it was so like crazy. Sometimes it would be like, I remember like walking the Gewurz and I coming in like, what? There's a Lumberjill match? That's a lot. It wasn't all,
yeah.
I can't remember specifically. Just like there's a lot of things that would just somehow, which is good, morph into something else or grow. I mean, we'd have the production rundown, so you'd always know, but sometimes things would be bigger than you thought, or it would just be maybe someone, because all the people working, agents, all kinds of people we're seeing like, oh, okay, here's the themes of the show. We have like a Gaga thing. So it might come from somewhere else. And Vince might say, and we're going to have a Lumberjill match. And like, oh, okay, we're doing that. But you kind of don't know who came up with that. Not, you know what I mean? It wasn't always just from like the small core of us. Things would come from all angles, and and he would service that. And it's a good thing to work with people too. Let's sometimes be like, yeah, let's give them something that they want. And then like, let's get Bruno involved because everyone loves Bruno, Harvey Whippleman. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then maybe he could, do a thing. And so while sometimes you might be looking at something like that was weird, but at the same time behind the scenes, it's like, oh, Bruno got a little payday and he got in there and is he going to get his, stuff out there? So a lot of different dynamics going on, so to speak.
So Miss Kitty's opponent is Harvina from Intercourse, Pennsylvania. And it really took me until I had no idea who Harvina was. Yeah. I couldn't even understand the name Harvina. Like, what does that even mean?
Female version of Harvey.
I got it now. It was a quick match. Can't really do much.
I suppose you didn't like that Kane was a dentist wrestler at some point too. I suppose you had a problem with that.
Fair. Eventually, the cat starts arguing with Jackie, who knocks her down, giving Harvina the opportunity to get a splash at a pinfall. She's the new women's champion. Kind of shows you how seriously you're taking this belt.
Yeah.
Michael Cole is immediately there to interview Harvina and quickly reveals that Harvina is, in fact, Harvey Whippleman. And Harvey says, that's right, I'm the world champ. I'm the world champ. And Harvey, you can't be the women's champ. You're a man. And then Harvey's like, how dare you? And he attacks Cole. And then all the women attack Harvey Whippleman.
Yeah.
To end the segment, what's going to happen with the women's title now?
Well, some of the thought was you might say like, oh, they're disrespecting the women's title, which is absolutely true. But part of the underlying thing always, and it didn't really work out or come to fruition, was like, like you said, yeah, Ivory, people were like, this is terrible. This is, ultimately, hopefully it'd be like, they got to get respect back to the women's title. So there's going to be, that was kind of the thought. Like, so, you shit on it. It isn't just shitting on it for, straight misogyny. It was like, oh, it's going to, ultimately these competitors are going to be like, let's restore its dignity or whatever. But that never really happened. So, just one of those things that didn't quite, but there was at least a nod to some sort of long-term thinking as to why this was happening and not just like, fuck, you know what I mean? And that kind of like, it just wasn't executed well, that whole thematic run, because they kind of already was redundant, because like, a few weeks ago, that was like, Ivory, like, what am I doing out here? This is disrespectful. But then, so just one of those things.
I mean, you have all the focus on all this other stuff. Some stuff is going to get laid by the wayside.
Certainly, yeah.
Backstage, Cactus is pitching the Radicalz to Triple H. Triple H says, who the hell do you guys think you are? Walking in here, barging into our office. I'm not denying the talent of these guys, but if you want a job, you come to us. And then Stephanie brings up like, you don't respect management. You're fighting backstage. How do we know this won't happen here? Which I think is a great line for the authority to ask. Ultimately, Triple H and Stephanie say they'll think about it. We get a shot of WWF New York, and Lillian Garcia reveals there's a big announcement on Thursday. She doesn't know what it's about, but it has to do with pro football.
Interesting.
Did you know by this point the XFL was happening?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all this had like already happened. In fact, it was funny. It was on the plane with Vince, and he's like, oh, to tell you, starting a new football league. I'm like, what? And he's like, and his reasoning, his sentence, he said, to me, it seems like the whole country gets built up into a football frenzy, and then the Super Bowl happens, and then poof, it disappears. I want to debut my league the week after the Super Bowl when everyone's all, it's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea.
Right.
I think ultimately the problem was a couple things. People were like, oh my God, the WWF's going to play football. Was there going to be explosions? Was there going to be this? Even though he had some good gimmicks, like, I'm going to encourage dating of cheerleaders and all this kind of shit. Like, but ultimately when he hired people, he had to be like, well, have some experience with football and the regulations and what in rules, and it is going to be football. It's not going to be a work. So people were, I think when it debuted, they were expecting like, is it going to be a work? Is there going to be crazy things? And ultimately, like, no, you can't really work it that much, or, but sometimes we'd have meetings. Like I tried to be like, hey, maybe, they had
I think by the end they started to, like, they were doing the Ventura, Jesse Ventura was the announcer. He was like working an angle with one of the coaches or something.
Yeah, there's things that, but not really what people expect. People wanted to, see, my God, what's happening here? And ultimately it was like, oh, this is just like all football. Like, oh, it just, goes to football. Although one thing, boy, Vince kind of like didn't like this, because I was saying like, well, I don't know if like part of the promotion was always like, oh, everyone's going to promote it and it's going to be like, we're not like those no fun, what did he call them? Like panty waist NFL. This is real football. And I would say like, well, ultimately the NFL's level of athlete, the payroll is so much more. You can't really compete. And he didn't like that, because I was kind of saying like, like you got to do all these weirder things like minor league baseball, compared to like Major League Baseball. And he'd be like, whoa, no, it's like he wanted to like compete with it, like it's on the same level of NFL. And I was like arguing like, oh, I don't know if you'd promo it like that. You shouldn't go against the NFL. You should kind of like have NFL guys come and say, oh, this is fun and weird and different. And he'd like, no, he wanted to like take them on. And I'm like, what's an NFL total payroll? Billions? What's, XFL payroll? Like, you're just not going to attract those kind of monsters. So, but
yeah, his stubbornness took over, it seemed. Because wasn't that the big, like, everyone tuned in the first week. The football itself wasn't that great, so people just didn't care,
also,
right?
like
Wasn't
I said,
that
people
the
were
big
expecting,
knock?
like, what am I going to, is there going to be an explosion on the field? Is there going to be what's happening? Everyone was like built into a frenzy, like, oh, it's just football. And then how do you establish out of the gate exciting football? I don't know. Every, USFL, everything has the same problem. NFL has a problem like week 6 and like, oh, this, the Jaguars are no good. And what's the ratings for this game? So, and that's so what do you do,
Yeah. So back to the action. It's the Hollies in a handicap match against Viscera, also stemming from SmackDown. I felt this was one handicap match too many on the show. It felt a little repetitive, but the finish was an inverse of the other handicap finish, which is that the Holly duo did manage to knock down Viscera and keep him down long enough for a pinfall. But then Viscera just gets his heat back, which it's diminishing returns. I feel like the attack and the splash after, it's almost exactly like what the Dudleys do when they lost earlier in the night. But I guess they didn't get their heat back, but they ended up getting beat up. But it seemed like a lot of repeats in this match. But also, though, late in the show, this could have also just been like, oh, we need like a 5-minute segment. Throw this in.
Well, and also sometimes it's one of those things where like you book the match or whatever, and then later like, oh, agents are off working the match, and then like, oh, is there similarities? Sometimes the pace is like, it's not like everyone got together, and like sometimes it's like, oh shit, they did similar to what we were doing, but we didn't know, because the match is just booked, not all the elements of the match. So things like that might happen. And, ultimately, yeah, to nitpick all these shit, but like, yeah,
I'm a nitpick.
The show was
smart
loaded, it's like a, whatever. It's like a 10-course meal, and like, oh, that was good. And, thing number 7, that was kind of similar to that dessert. And yeah, sure. But ultimately, good. Crazy meal, but yeah, I can't disagree. But
then we get a shorter version of what I assume the interview that aired on Halftime Heat with Steve Austin was. It's JR at Austin's ranch in Texas. Austin looks in good spirits overall and says that the neck brace pisses him off because it makes it harder to drink beer. Ultimately, he said he's going to get back in the ring. He said doctors told him he couldn't get back before. He's going to do it. And it's revealed that he's engaged to Deborah, which didn't quite last.
Yeah, get her over a bit too. A nice rub, as they say. Yeah, incredible. Even all this thing's running on these full cylinders, and then always realizing, like, guess what? Austin's still in the, hanging on the side. he's going to come back. Oh, dear Lord. And then like, guess what? The Undertaker one day is going to come back too. Wow. So, just think everything's riding high. And there's football. It's just like, it's just a whirlwind.
I actually read in the Observer that the Undertaker pulled a muscle or something, and now he's out even longer.
I do remember, we just get like kind of like updates or sort of like, it's training or something coming back. I think he was rehabbing and had a setback or something. Pulled a muscle. That's a bad, like, even if that.
I'm not sure that that's exactly it.
Pulled a muscle is like a antiquated 70s term by now. Oh, I pulled a muscle. I don't even hear that anymore. You're old and wise beyond your years. That seemed like 1975. I pulled a muscle. Something my mom would say. Oh, I guess he pulled a muscle.
We have Matt Hardy versus Bubba. The APA come down for protection so that the Dudleys don't get attacked by Edge and Christian is the gimmick here. Ends in a DQ when Bubba brings in a chair. Matt gets the chair and swings it at Bubba. So the refs do know how to call for a DQ.
Yeah.
And this turns into like a whole schmaz, but I really like it. The APA come in and they help attack the Hardys because they're being paid, and they're kind of like hesitant, but the Dudleys keep reminding them, we paid you. You got to do this. You're doing this for money. And they're like, all right, I guess we don't care about the Hardys and Edge and Christian. Sure, we'll keep doing this. Edge and Christian run out to try to help save, but the Acolytes attack them. They end up doing a awesome spot. How could you not get people hungry for tables when you do spots like this? You just giving it away. You stack up double tables, and then Bubba brings stairs into the ring so he could climb up them, and then puts Matt Hardy across the double tables, and then power bombs Jeff Hardy through the double tables.
That was a good one.
It looks so good. I love it.
Oh, so funny. And again, the timing, like all this stuff, it's like the timing. Like we said, when it doesn't work and you got to like, give you shots and,
Yeah, no, this was perfect. Yeah, Bubba is euphoric again. It's great. Backstage, Triple H tells the Radicalz that they've talked about it and they're not quite cut out for WWF. Sorry, we're not going to hire you. You should get going. You should leave. In fact, we're going to get some people to escort you right now. And they're like, well, you don't got to escort us. We could find the door ourselves. All right. We got a plug for the TV Guide magazines with WWE on the cover, and we learned that SmackDown scored its highest rating ever, and it was competing against the State of the Union address, which is crazy. Which shows like nobody gives a crap about G-dubs. Or was this? Yeah, I guess this was his first address.
Well, you just said no one gives a shit, and I guess I didn't give a shit either. I can't even remember. Yeah,
I guess it was Clinton's last, right? Because the election is at the end of 2000. So I could see how nobody gives a shit. Triple H versus Kane in the main event. And Kane's music hits. He doesn't come out. Where's Kane? Triple H says he understands. You can't hang with X-Pac. I mean, really, you can't hang with X-Pac. I'm surprised he didn't make like a charred dick joke. Then, you can't hang with X-Pac, and then you have to fight the game. I don't blame you for cowering, but I'm going to give you a 10 count to come out to the ring. And before he could finish the 10 count, Cactus Jack comes out, and he cuts a promo, ends up getting in the ring, and the two of them get in a big fight. Triple H escapes, walking up the ramp, and who should attack him but the Radicalz? Throw him back in the ring. Big schmaz ending. Triple H gets beat down by the Radicalz and Cactus Jack, and the crowd gets sent home happy, I guess. And a lot of questions to end the show. Will the Radicalz be hired? How will Triple H get his payback against them?
No, it was great. And like I said, so much that came organically, and it ended up being like from just, they're going to just sit in the audience and it'll be a mystery and they'll be here or there. What's going to happen? And then it ended up like, oh my God, they're a huge physical part of the show in so many spots. But at the end, it was still like the same. It was like, they're not officially even here. You know what I mean? It wasn't like that thing where you're left with like, oh, if they were all in their gear and officially there, and now we have to deal with them, and it's still like you always want to just like spread it out. You know what I mean? You know, so like it's just like, yeah, it's great. So many questions, you know, and then, you know, later you supply the answers at a pay-per-view, hopefully. But yeah, a great show. Really one of the greatest Raws I ever worked, I think, just in terms of just all the interesting stuff and storylines and the birth of the APA, the crystallizing of Kurt Angle's, you know, gimmick. Because especially when you see things that like, that works and we know what to do with it. And here's why it works. And here's what we can have moving forward. That, you know, makes it so much easier instead of like, how are we getting this over? Or people, is it like this or is it like this? Like, no, Kurt Angle is this, you know, etc. APA is now this, you know, so makes our job easier.
Yeah, very exciting. Yeah. SmackDown is going to be just as eventful, and a lot of great stuff happening around here. And there's still more news to come, like with the XFL, Rock hosting SNL. This is a very, very eventful moment in WWE history.
Absolutely. And it's almost like surreal when like, because at every like interstitial is like, and we're on the cover of Newsweek. Not like Newsweek means shit, but back then it was, you know, back then, yeah, absolutely. And here's, you know, for even those production value, here's these commercials and here's this and here's that. And like, oh, this is a mainstream. It's really getting into the mainstream.
Yeah, we're very excited, and we're glad you're along for the ride. Please send us your feedback. Send us your questions. tftattitudeera@gmail.com. And for the love of God, like and subscribe to our YouTube channels, social media networks. Like, come on already. And tell your friends. Tell your friends that you used to watch WWE with. This is the best recap podcast around. Because we are.
In history.
In herstory, too. Yes. History and herstory. All right, folks, we'll be back next week. Tales from the Attitude Era.